From the moment I opened my eyes each morning, I wore the mask I had perfected over decades. Outside, the world saw someone living modestly, cautiously, even frugally. But behind closed doors, I carried a secret that could shatter assumptions. I earned $40,000 a month. $40,000 that my children didn't know about. $40,000 that they assumed I couldn't possibly have. The irony was suffocating. Every time my son laughed about my cheap coffee, or my daughter rolled her eyes at my thrift store shopping, a quiet ache settled in my chest. I understood why they mocked me, because they didn't know. Because I had chosen to protect them from the weight of my world, even if it meant bearing the loneliness of being misunderstood. Mornings were the hardest. I brewed my coffee in the same chipped mug I had used for years, feeling the bitter warmth against my lips as the sun filtered lazily through the thin curtains. I had the means to replace every worn item in the house, to fill the cupboards with the finest ingredients, to order groceries that arrived at the door in pristine boxes, yet I chose simplicity. It wasn't about denial or masochism, it was strategy. I wanted my children to grow up grounded, to value effort over entitlement, and to see me as their parent, not a bank. Still, the gap between my reality and their perception gnawed at me, a constant, invisible tension. When my children entered the kitchen, their teasing began without fail. "Mom, why do you insist on buying the cheapest cereal?" my daughter would ask, her tone a mix of disbelief and mild amusement. I'd smile, leaning against the counter, and shrug as if poverty were simply my fate. "I like a bargain," I would answer, keeping my voice light, masking the truth of my bank statements and contracts, of clients who paid handsomely for my work that I never flaunted. The kitchen, warm and sunlit, became a stage where contrasts played out, abundance hidden beneath scarcity, generosity cloaked in austerity. Every word they spoke, every playful jab, reminded me that I was living in two parallel worlds, and I was the only one who knew it. I remember one particular morning, crisp and bright, when my son flopped into the chair, exhaling exaggeratedly. "Do you even have any money, Mom?" he asked, smirking. I forced a laugh, sliding a piece of toast onto his plate. "Not much," I said, and in that single sentence, I contained an entire lifetime of deception and restraint. Inside, I wanted to tell him, to watch his face shift from mockery to shock to, maybe, understanding. But I didn't. I had learned that revealing too much too soon could disrupt the fragile equilibrium I had painstakingly built. To keep the household functioning, to keep the children focused on school, friendship, and life's lessons, I had to wear the mask. Evenings were quieter, but no less complicated. After the children went to bed, I would sit at my small, tidy desk, laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating contracts, invoices, and messages from clients who trusted me with work that demanded precision and excellence. I made $40,000 a month, yes, but that money was meaningless if it tore the fabric of my family apart. I was acutely aware of the contrast between my professional triumphs and my domestic humility. There was power in secrecy, I had realized, and also a profound loneliness. My children's laughter, their casual disregard for my supposed poverty, was bittersweet. I loved them deeply, but they could not love me fully, not knowing the truth. Maintaining this double life required discipline. I calculated every expense carefully, not out of necessity but out of habit. I shopped sales, clipped coupons, and chose thrift over luxury, while secretly investing in businesses, stocks, and ventures that would make a future for them without their knowledge. On paper, I was an ordinary parent. In reality, I was quietly building a foundation of extraordinary wealth. I thought often about how easy it would be to reveal everything, to sweep away the misunderstanding in a single conversation. But I also knew that revelation could backfire. Greed, envy, or a sense of betrayal could fracture the relationships I treasured. So I remained vigilant, performing the role of the humble parent with almost theatrical dedication. One afternoon, I was folding laundry while my daughter sat nearby, scrolling on her phone. She looked up and said, "Mom, why don't you just buy nice things like everyone else? You'd be happier, I think." I froze mid-fold, the fabric of a sweater crumpled in my hands. I wanted to laugh, to tell her that I had more than most people could dream of, but instead I placed the sweater neatly on the pile and said, "I like what I have." Simple words, but they carried the weight of my secret, my carefully cultivated mask. Inside, my heart twisted. I wondered if they would ever understand the sacrifice, the intentional restraint, and the love that motivated it all. The children's misconceptions about my finances were relentless. My son, in particular, had a habit of comparing me to his friends' parents. "Mr. Anderson drives a Tesla," he would say, pointing out the latest gadgetry or luxury outing. "Do we even have a car that nice?" I nodded absently, keeping my expression neutral. "We have what we need," I replied, but inside I bristled. We had enough to buy the Tesla and more, but teaching them the value of humility and resilience meant enduring their teasing and their unintentional scorn. There was a moral tension in that choice, the allure of revealing wealth versus the necessity of guiding character. I chose the latter every single day. There were quiet moments when the weight of my secret pressed hardest. Late at night, when the house was still and the moonlight filtered through the windows, I would sometimes speak aloud to the empty rooms. "They don't know," I'd whisper to myself, a confession to the shadows. "They have no idea how much I earn, what I do, or what I've done for them." The silence that followed was a stark contrast to the bustling, joyful noise of family life, a reminder that secrecy came with isolation. Pride in my accomplishments warred with the sadness of invisibility. My children's ignorance protected them, but it also kept me from full emotional expression. Yet, there were moments of unexpected tenderness that made the balancing act worthwhile. When my daughter returned home from school, tired and frustrated, I offered a listening ear, not a lecture, not a story about the wealth she could never imagine. When my son struggled with homework, I helped patiently, hiding the anxiety and stress of my professional life. These moments, seemingly ordinary, became powerful acts of love. They reinforced the contrast framing that had defined my existence. While my children assumed scarcity, I supplied abundance in ways they could not yet comprehend. I gave them stability, guidance, and unconditional support, proof that wealth, in my eyes, was not counted in dollars, but in dedication and presence. The tension escalated during family outings. At the grocery store, my son would groan at the cost of a snack, and I would nod along, agreeing, pretending that our modest lifestyle was entirely by necessity. Meanwhile, I knew that I could pay for the most expensive items in the store without a second thought. These moments were simultaneously painful and exhilarating. Painful because of the misunderstanding and the subtle sting of underestimation. Exhilarating because I knew that my restraint, my discipline, and my intentional concealment were shaping their values in ways they could not yet see. The duality of my life, wealth hidden behind simplicity, was a constant, high-stakes balancing act. I often reflected on why I had chosen this path. It wasn't merely about humility or avoiding envy. It was about loyalty, to my children, to their emotional well-being, and to the family unit. Revealing my earnings prematurely could invite greed, entitlement, or resentment. Pretending poverty allowed me to teach resilience, empathy, and appreciation. It created a canvas on which their values could develop untainted by material temptation. Yet, with every joke about being poor or every frustrated sigh at thriftiness, I felt the sting of misjudgment. I was strong, competent, and financially secure, but the world, my own family, even saw only the mask. There were days when the weight of secrecy became almost unbearable. At work, I negotiated multi-thousand-dollar contracts, celebrated victories, and strategized for growth. At home, I measured every expenditure, clipped every coupon, and smiled at playful accusations of frugality. I lived in two worlds, one of abundance, one of apparent scarcity. The contrast was dizzying, and I sometimes feared that the truth, if revealed, would shatter the fragile equilibrium I had maintained for so long. My children's laughter, though sometimes sharp, reminded me why the mask was necessary. Their innocence, their assumptions, were gifts, and protecting those gifts required sacrifice, sometimes painful, always intentional. Occasionally, I dropped subtle hints, small moments that hinted at a larger reality. A casually mentioned investment, a fleeting reference to work, a brief glimpse of ambition beyond domestic life. My children rarely noticed, or they dismissed it, laughing at what they perceived as exaggeration. Those moments stung, a reminder that my reality was invisible to them. But I took solace in knowing that seeds were planted. One day, perhaps, understanding would grow, and the veil of simplicity I maintained would give way to comprehension and respect. Until then, I persevered, balancing pride with humility, joy with loneliness, and secrecy with love. Through it all, I learned to savor small victories. My daughter complimented my cooking, oblivious to the luxury ingredients I had sourced at a fraction of the cost. My son expressed gratitude for a thoughtful gift, unaware that it had been carefully curated from a generous budget. These moments reinforced my purpose. My wealth, hidden as it was a tool, not a trophy. And while the contrast between perception and reality created tension, it also shaped resilience, empathy, and trust, the very qualities I wanted my children to carry forward into adulthood. And so, I continued my daily performance. Mornings of simple breakfasts, afternoons of calculated thrift, evenings of quiet reflection, and nights of professional triumph unfolded in rhythm. The children laughed, teased, and occasionally frowned, never realizing the truth behind my modesty. Yet in the quiet behind the mask, I nurtured a life of abundance, integrity, and intentionality. I was their parent, their guide, and their silent benefactor. The duality of my existence was both a burden and a gift, a complex tapestry of secrecy and love, waiting for the right moment, if ever, to be revealed. There were fleeting thoughts about when and how I might disclose my earnings. What would their reactions be? Shock, envy, admiration. I imagined confrontations, arguments, tears, and laughter, each scenario spinning in my mind like a fragile pendulum. The suspense of potential revelation kept me vigilant, my emotions taut, my love layered with strategy. Every choice, every carefully maintained habit was part of a larger narrative I controlled. The narrative of who I was, who I appeared to be, and who my children might one day understand me to be. Even as the days blurred together, one truth remained clear. The mask was necessary, yet heavy. It shielded my children, yet isolated me. It preserved love, yet obscured understanding. And as I folded another load of laundry, brewed another cup of coffee in my chipped mug, and smiled at the casual jokes of my children, I carried the quiet, unspoken knowledge of what I had achieved, what I earned, and what I sacrificed. The mask of simplicity, carefully worn and lovingly maintained, had become my identity. And in that identity, I discovered an unexpected strength, the ability to live in contrast, to balance abundance with humility, and to love without needing recognition. It was a delicate equilibrium, a secret garden of wealth, loyalty, and moral intentionality. I didn't know when or if the truth would be revealed, but I knew that my children's perception of me as modest, perhaps even poor, was, in its own way, a testament to my commitment, my discipline, and the depth of my love. The story of my hidden wealth was not just about money. It was about choices, values, and the courage to protect those I loved most, even when it meant enduring misunderstanding. And as I watched my children move through life, laughing, teasing, and living, I held on to the hope that one day the veil would lift, and the contrast between their perception and my reality would illuminate the lessons I had lived quietly all these years. Until then, the mask remained, perfectly in place, a shield for love and a crucible for patience, resilience, and unwavering loyalty. The day I decided to tell them the truth began like any other, but inside, a storm was building. I had rehearsed the conversation countless times in my mind: how to start, what words to choose, how to brace for their reactions. Would they laugh in disbelief? Would they cry? Would they feel betrayed? Or worse, would envy flicker in their eyes? The tension coiled tightly in my chest as I watched them move about the house, blissfully unaware of the revelation I had been carrying for so long. Every laugh, every casual remark about our modest life was a reminder that the moment had to come, but that it would not be easy. I called them into the living room one evening, just as the golden light of sunset poured through the windows, bathing everything in warmth. "Sit down," I said, my voice calm but deliberate. They exchanged puzzled glances, sensing that the tone was different, heavier. My son plopped onto the couch first, slouching in his familiar, casual way. My daughter followed, hesitating just slightly as if expecting a trick, a joke. I took a deep breath and looked at them both. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, and in that moment the quiet anticipation of years of secrecy hung thick in the air. The words came slowly at first, like dipping a toe into icy water. "Everything you think you know about our finances is not the full story." Their eyebrows shot up, and their eyes locked on mine, alert and unblinking. "I earn much more than you realize. In fact, I earn $40,000 a month." I let the words settle, watching as disbelief rippled across their faces. My son's jaw dropped slightly, while my daughter's hand flew to her mouth. The contrast between their shock and my calm delivery was striking. For years, they had assumed scarcity, Now they were confronted with abundance they had never imagined. Disbelief hung in the room like a tangible cloud. My son's voice, sharp with incredulity, finally broke the silence. Wait, 40,000 every month. He leaned forward, eyes wide, voice trembling with a mix of amazement and frustration. All this time you let us think we were poor. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said, feeling the weight of years in that single word. I wanted you to grow up grounded, to understand value, and to see life beyond money. This was never about hiding from you, it was about protecting you. My daughter shook her head, her eyes glistening, a mixture of awe and hurt. Protecting us by lying, she whispered. The tension spiked as they absorbed the revelation. There was anger in my son's tone now, sharp and accusatory. Protecting us? You let us think we were struggling, made us think we had nothing. We teased you, we complained, and you just let it happen. I held their gaze steadily. Yes, I admitted, because the lessons you learned in humility, patience, and understanding are far more valuable than the discomfort of immediate knowledge. Money can be taken, lost, or misused, but character, empathy, and respect, those are priceless. Their expressions softened slightly, but still lingered on the edge of resentment. I could see their minds racing, trying to reconcile the parent they thought they knew with the person in front of them, the person who had quietly, diligently built security for them without any recognition. You could have told us, my daughter cried, standing up, packing. We would have respected you. I nodded, feeling both sorrow and pride. I know, I said, and one day perhaps I will tell you everything in detail, but not before you were ready to see it, to understand it without envy or distraction. You needed to grow into the kind of people who could handle truth responsibly. The contrast was clear. Misunderstanding versus clarity, shock versus the potential for acceptance. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the faint ticking of a wall clock. I let them digest, knowing that silence could sometimes speak louder than words. Slowly, I began to explain the mechanics of my work, the effort and responsibility behind every dollar. I spoke of contracts, investments, and careful planning. $40,000 is not magic, I said. It's a result of discipline, consistency, and integrity. I've earned it and I've used it wisely. Not to flaunt, not to indulge, but to ensure stability for you, our family. I could see the spark of admiration flicker, buried beneath lingering surprise and budding understanding. My son, still seated but more attentive now, let out a long sigh. I can't believe this, he muttered. All these years I judged you for what I thought was poverty. His voice softened, vulnerability seeping through the shock. And I mocked you. My daughter's eyes were wide with a different emotion, a mix of guilt and relief. I feel ashamed, she admitted, voice trembling. I didn't know, I assumed. And I was wrong. The contrast was visceral, resentment shifting to recognition, disbelief giving way to reflection. The room vibrated with emotional tension as I listened, silently proud that the revelation was beginning to foster growth rather than division. We sat together for hours, unraveling the hidden layers of our family life. I shared more stories of my choices, explaining why I had maintained the mask of simplicity. I wanted you to appreciate what you have, to understand that happiness doesn't come from what's in your wallet but from what's in your heart, I said. I wanted you to develop resilience, humility, and respect, not entitlement or envy. They listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes pausing to ask questions. The conversation was raw, intimate, and charged with the contrast between past misconceptions and newfound clarity. I noticed subtle shifts in their demeanor. My son, who had been skeptical and accusatory, now leaned forward, curiosity replacing anger. So all the thriftiness, all the jokes, the teasing, it was intentional? He asked. I smiled gently. Yes, I admitted. Every small act, every minor inconvenience you noticed was a lesson, sometimes painful, sometimes humorous, but always with love as the foundation. My daughter's hands trembled slightly as she reached for mine. I can't believe how patient you were, she whispered. I never realized the depth of your intentions. The room seemed to exhale collectively, a release of tension built over years of misperception. As the conversation deepened, we explored broader life lessons. I emphasized values of responsibility, integrity, and emotional maturity. Money without character is hollow, I said, and character without understanding of reality is fragile. I wanted you to be strong, to see both sides of life, to navigate challenges without relying on shortcuts. I hid the money not to deceive you, but to give you the opportunity to grow into thoughtful, compassionate adults. The contrast between wealth and wisdom, abundance and restraint, became the heartbeat of our dialogue, each revelation layered with moral weight. Tears were shed, not only from shock but from gratitude, realization, and a dawning respect. My daughter hugged me tightly, murmuring, "I understand now. I see why you did this." My son placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes reflecting pride and a newfound admiration. "I was blind," he admitted. "I judged too quickly. I see the strength in your choices." The emotional peaks had arrived, the tension resolving into reconciliation and understanding. Contrast had driven the catharsis. Misunderstanding versus clarity, resentment versus loyalty, ignorance versus insight. We discussed the temptation of greed and envy, acknowledging that such feelings could arise when truth is revealed. "It's natural," I said, "but true strength lies in managing those emotions, in choosing integrity over indulgence. You have both now, the tools to recognize and respect abundance without letting it corrupt your values." The children nodded, absorbing the lesson not as a lecture but as lived truth. The reconciliation was not just emotional, it was moral, a shared recognition of ethics, responsibility, and family loyalty. The night stretched on with laughter, stories, and candid admissions. My children reflected on moments when they had mocked me, moments they had failed to see the effort behind the simplicity. I shared anecdotes of work challenges, sacrifices, and decisions made quietly, always with the goal of protecting and nurturing them. Each story reinforced contrast: humility versus pride, scarcity versus abundance, misunderstanding versus insight. Slowly, the room transformed from a space of tension to a haven of clarity and connection. By the time we reached the closing hours of that evening, something had shifted irreversibly. The children's perception of me had expanded beyond the mask they had assumed for so long. They understood not only my earnings but the philosophy, the intentionality, and the love that had guided every choice. They felt gratitude, respect, and responsibility in ways I had hoped for but dared not assume until this moment. The contrast of past assumptions against present understanding highlighted the transformative power of truth. I watched them sleep later that night, and a profound sense of relief settled over me. The weight of secrecy, years in the making, had been lifted without fracturing our bond. There would be conversations ahead, questions, and perhaps moments of envy or misunderstanding, but the foundation was now stronger. Loyalty had replaced resentment, understanding had replaced shock, and respect had replaced ignorance. The revelation had not only clarified financial truths, but had illuminated the moral compass I hoped they would carry forward. The next morning brought subtle changes. My son lingered over breakfast, asking about choices I had made, showing curiosity without judgment. My daughter sought advice on budgeting and planning, their eyes reflecting thoughtfulness and engagement. The shift was delicate but unmistakable, a movement from casual misunderstanding to active reflection, from perception of poverty to recognition of abundance, and from casual mockery to deliberate admiration. Contrast framed every interaction, reinforcing lessons of integrity, humility, and emotional maturity. In the days and weeks that followed, our family routines retained their warmth and familiarity, but the dynamics had evolved. Conversations were richer, laughter carried deeper layers of understanding, and subtle respect underpinned even the smallest interactions. We were no longer a family bound by assumptions and teasing, but a family aligned in knowledge, appreciation, and ethical grounding. I felt both relief and pride as I observed this transformation, the proof that transparency, carefully delivered, can strengthen bonds rather than weaken them. Looking back, I realized that revelation was not a single moment but a process. The initial shock, the wave of emotion, the moral reflections, and the final reconciliation were all stages in a journey that tested patience, empathy, and trust. Contrast remained central. Clarity replaced misunderstanding, loyalty replaced resentment, and insight replaced ignorance. The children had seen the truth, yes, but more importantly, they had learned to respect the intent behind it. They had learned to value effort, humility, and integrity above mere appearances. I reflected on my choices, the years of masking simplicity to teach lessons, and the delicate balance of secrecy and love. I realized that the effort had been worth every moment of misunderstanding, every teasing comment, and every sigh of exasperation. My children had grown in awareness, character, and compassion. The revelation had transformed not just their perception of me, but their perception of life, responsibility, and what it means to act with integrity. As I watched them navigate their daily lives with this new understanding, I recognized the profound difference between knowledge and wisdom. I had given them knowledge of my earnings, but what mattered more was the wisdom embedded in the lessons of restraint, humility, and love. Contrast framed the moral arc of the story: abundance paired with integrity, revelation paired with understanding, and truth paired with compassion. In teaching them these lessons, I had fulfilled the role I had long envisioned, not just a provider, but a guide, a mentor, and a parent whose love transcended material measures. The revelation was complete, yet the story continued in subtle ways. Daily life carried new depth, each interaction now layered with awareness, each decision now considered with understanding. My children no longer saw only the surface. They saw the intent, the effort, and the moral choices that shaped our household. Loyalty had solidified, respect had blossomed, and understanding had taken root. Contrast had guided the journey, suspense had heightened engagement, and moral tension had enriched growth. The lessons of humility, resilience, and integrity had been internalized, creating a foundation that would endure far beyond the moment of revelation. And so, as the sun set on the days following that fateful conversation, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The mask of simplicity, once necessary for teaching and protection, had given way to truth and understanding without fracturing the bonds it had safeguarded. My children had confronted shock, disbelief, and envy, and emerged with loyalty, respect, and moral insight. I had navigated the revelation with care, patience, and love, and in doing so, strengthened not only our family's unity but their capacity for empathy, discernment, and growth. This chapter, this reckoning, was not the end but a milestone. It marked the transformation from misunderstanding to clarity, from secrecy to trust, and from perceived weakness to recognized strength. The emotional highs and lows, the moral contrasts, and the suspenseful tension had all culminated in reconciliation and reflection. My children now carried lessons that would shape their lives, informed not just by wealth, but by the integrity, patience, and love behind it. And in witnessing their evolution, I knew that the years of careful concealment, the weight of dual lives, and the persistent tension had been worth every moment. Truth, when delivered with intention and love, had the power to heal, teach, and inspire. Misunderstanding had given way to insight, resentment had softened into respect, and shock had evolved into admiration. The revelation had been more than a disclosure of wealth. It had been a lesson in character, in loyalty, and in the courage to act with integrity. And as our family moved forward, I could see the impact of that moment in every interaction, every conversation, and every act of consideration. The moral arc had reached its peak, leaving a legacy of understanding, empathy, and enduring connection. By the time we sat together for our evening routine later that week, the contrast between past and present was unmistakable. My children now approached discussions about money, choices, and responsibility with a level of thoughtfulness that had been absent before. They were no longer reacting blindly. They were engaging consciously, weighing decisions with awareness and respect. I felt pride, relief, and profound gratitude, knowing that the revelation had not only clarified facts, but had cultivated emotional maturity. The suspense of the unknown, the tension of secrecy, and the challenge of moral guidance had culminated in lasting transformation. As I reflected on the journey from mask to revelation, I realized that patience, intention, and love had been the guiding forces. By withholding certain truths until the right time, I had ensured that the children's emotional growth and moral development preceded their understanding of financial abundance. Contrast had framed every choice: scarcity versus security, misunderstanding versus comprehension, ignorance versus insight. And now, with clarity and reconciliation in place, the family bond was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than ever. The reckoning was complete, but its effects rippled outward, influencing our interactions, decisions, and shared experiences. The lessons embedded in the revelation, humility, integrity, and emotional resilience, would continue to shape my children long after the moment had passed. And in that continuity, I found not only satisfaction but inspiration, knowing that love guided by moral purpose could transform perception, resolve conflict, and leave an enduring mark on character. Ultimately, the story of our revelation was more than a disclosure of hidden wealth. It was a journey through contrast, suspense, and moral tension, leading to clarity, growth, and strengthened bonds. The children had confronted the truth, grappled with emotional complexity, and emerged with respect, understanding, and loyalty. And in that transformation, I recognized the fulfillment of a long-held vision. A family united not just by love, but by shared principles, moral awareness, and the courage to navigate the challenges of truth with grace and integrity.